Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. 5 things on my list today of titles, subjects to talk about from my notes. And the first one is, the title goes like this: Return to Pilates through Contrology. Return to Pilates through Contrology. What does that mean? Now, even if you know that Joe's book called Return to Life Through Contrology exists, and you might even know that in MMP, the 3 things in that book that are the basis of the point of view of MMP as a view of Pilates. But enough. Pilates always has and always will be subject to the definition of those who seek to explain it, me included. The 10,000 views, if you will, that come from the mother of all things, which is the name or the word Pilates. So, to me, it's a subtle suggestion that for as much as Pilates is whatever you want it to be, to the extent that you want to return to whatever it might be other than what you make of it, then returning to Pilates through Contrology would be a good way to do that. So number two, they're all sort of woven together, but number 2, still to this day, one of my most precious interactions, my most honest interactions with a curious student was a question they asked the moment they met me, really, and that was, if I make something up, how do I know if it's Pilates? That's as best I can remember the directness and the simplicity of the question. How do I know if I make something up if it's Pilates or not? Right? And you can look at characteristics or principles or properties of Pilates well, the first answer to that question is you don't, or you can't know whether it is Pilates or not. And then from whatever you know, regardless of how limited, that you know the word allows you to assume something, right? For in the end, no matter how much you end up learning, it's still about what you end up representing as a teacher and an instructor. There's tradition to draw from. So if what the tradition that you know about is always a source of confidence that what you're doing is teaching Pilates, right? And within that tradition, there's principles that Freeman and Eisen articulated, which sort of became the catalyst to allowing improv of Pilates or interpretation of Pilates based on principles, which to this day I think feeds and fuels the tsunami of passion is its ability or facility to be generally interpreted by whomever wishes to try to share what they know. Okay? You might know you're teaching Pilates from the sensation of it, whatever that is. If there is a sensation involved with it, or a spectrum of sensations, right? Might be sensational as part of what gives you the confidence that when you make something up, is it Pilates or not? And of course, from another way of looking at Pilates is through a presumption of the existence of an ideal within Joe's original work. MMP does it just from his book. But take any part of his original work, I think, and it's all consistent, meaning his film, his pictures, and his words are all consistent with what's represented in the book. That's why in MMP, this point of view of Pilates is ideal and only promulgated from the book he wrote. It's like you don't need anything more. Now, the other thing about how do I know if I'm teaching Pilates? Well, there's other points of view than an ideal view, right? There's classical as a view of Pilates. There's contemporary as a view of Pilates. There's modern, and there's therapeutic, and there's infused, and there's evolved. Did I say that one? And of course, there's an ideal way to look at it. I say, of course, because I spent my whole life seeking to illuminate that notion to see if there's any basis in it in Joe's original work. But it's just another point of view. And the real strength of a point of view is to be aware of it without it having been the only point of view that you operate from. So number 3, there is no U in Pilates. And U is just the letter U. So in that regard, there is no letter U in the word Pilates because it's spelled P-I-L-A-T-E-S, right? And yet the play on the letter, not the word, as being the word you, meaning you, the viewer, you, me, the person, you, the Pilates instructor, right? There is no you in Pilates. So to talk about how do I know if what I'm teaching is Pilates, well, from a lot of different points of view, that would be determined by the point of view. So it's classical, or it's contemporary, or it's modern, or it's therapeutic, or however. And MMP is a point of view, it's ideal. And so all I can and find focused is to speak about that point of view. And in MMP, you know if you're teaching Pilates because you know what Pilates is, what you're aiming for, and you know that it ends in a sensation, not ends in, but there's the potential for a sensation, which means Pilates is experiential. And in knowing that that's a target, then how do I know if I make something up if it's Pilates or not. Well, for what? So, if you make it up, obviously it's not original work, is one way to look at that. You might look at what you're creatively doing and say, where is that represented in the sequence of Joe's choreography, Joe's mat? And see, there I bring in what you make up is only relative to what you surround it with, meaning what comes before and what comes after, because the mat choreography is sequential in nature. And so if you make something up and it's consistent with the inherent nature of the original work, I would say that's a good reason to believe that it might be Pilates. It's at least something close to Pilates. If Pilates is the original work, okay. And so, to me, classical is the lineage that comes as closely to and directly from Joe's original work as represented by tradition and word of mouth and folklore. But certainly, in my experience of classical never addresses the question of why, because it undermines the chosen position to be coming from. And because of that, MMP is neoclassical. So if you want to understand, it's a point of view of Pilates, and it's neoclassical in nature, because all it really does is take Joe's book, along with whatever else you have in film and pictures and words. But that's Joe's book, and that's where it starts and goes beyond that to the ideal. So what makes MMP neoclassical, which means new classical, is that it embraces the ideal nature within classical that classical can't inherently acknowledge. So that even if you are and lucky to be really close classically to the original work, it can't hurt to know. It can be disappointing to know that it has an essence of its own, and that through MMP eyes, it has a reason for what it is. You can understand the reason. You can know what your target is as an instructor, and you can aim for that target and visibly recognize the experience when it's happening. And because of all of that, it's not about you. And that's why there is no you in Pilates. And so you can't have it both ways in a way. If either whatever you make up is Pilates, or by whatever distinction you make Pilates, and from that distinction, you're inherently limited to the entertainment of others, which, no, that's not right. That may be true, but it's not. No. What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is that from within the MMP point of view, it's not about you. It's not about how much you know. It's really about delivering and empowering the control that comes with the pursuit of the choreography. And the experience that comes off of that, within the MMP point of view, has a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. Because you're completely coordinated. 3 capacities. That's a good word, capacities, in the human being. Doesn't mean they're the only capacities. It just means that Joe, in his definition, cites body, mind, and spirit. And looking at them as capacities is an MMP thing. And it allows you to interpret body, mind, and spirit as being, thinking, and observing. It doesn't allow you to. It presumes the comparison. Okay? And in being aware that, as an instructor, you're helping a student coordinate those 3 capacities. It's only as special as you recognize it as such, which can be pretty special. Number 4. So, Joe in the bathtub. There's archival, there's Joe film out there, film that Joe took. And in this case, of Joe. So he may have set up the camera or had somebody behind it. But it's over his shoulder. He's sitting in a tub. And you can see an apparatus attached to the end of the tub, which is a reformer pivot bar with springs. Or if you took, surely if you went to the trademark office, you would find companies right now trying to trademark Joe's Aqua Reformer, right? There's so much in the video, and just absorb the energy of it. And compared to some of the energy in his earlier film, it seems less energy and to me despondent. And yet maybe not, maybe that's not. But absorb the energy and make of it whatever you wish. What really matters is the fact of a push-through bar on a hinge submerged within a bathtub so that the feet can be in Pilates V and push in and out under tension and, of course, proceed through the 4 positions of footwork, which he does, by the way. That's so more important than his mood or his energy or when it happened is the fact of seeing the apparatus being demonstrated, and more significant to me than the apparatus being demonstrated is the consistency of pattern that he matches with the rest of his work. The progression of through footwork, going from 2 legs to 1 leg. So why am I telling you this? Because nobody has seen all of the puzzle pieces of the relics that exist around Joe and the Pilates culture. Enough pieces have surfaced. To me, the book surfaced a long time ago, but the book surfaced, and there's enough there to get to the ideal. My point to you is that when you come upon some new piece of relic from the Pilates past, your understanding and awareness of the ideal that exists just from within his book that expands out through his original work consistently, and even to the point of seeing Joe in the bathtub demonstrating his aqua reformer. Another completely great thing about it is, what does he do by taking the apparatus underwater or into water? What does he do? He returns the fish to the sea. He brings the human body that's mostly water and puts it in water to take out the weight of the body in the performance of the exercise, which is what the reformer on land does as well. If you can't do the rollover on the mat, doing the short spine is a luxury of range that you don't have at your disposal on your own. So there's a great example of spring supporting load, because it's not about the load as much as it's about the control that the load is hanging off of. And the less the load is just hanging, like muscle that's not engaged, the lighter you are in space. So Joe in the bathtub is, when you get to see that, recognize, feel the energy for one thing, and for me, there ought to be enough confirmation of Joe's genius to give you more confidence than it seems he had toward the end of his career. And this is just a whimsical, general, personal opinion that comes down to know what you know. And so when you see footage you haven't seen before, or a picture you haven't seen before, or when you're making up an exercise and wondering if it's Pilates, the ideal, or being aware of the ideal that MMP is pointing to, gives you the understanding of the uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. And to the extent when you make something up, it fits in with that definition. That's the extent to which you can have confidence that at least what you made up harmonizes with the ideal that's in the original. And that may be the least thing from your mind. You know, you may have absorbed enough of the ideal to then want to take it subjectively off in your area of interest. That's part of the 10,000 things. Number five. And it comes back to number one about, or number two about all of it, about how do I know if I'm teaching Pilates? If I make something up, how do I know if it's Pilates or not? Well, I often compare most of the Pilates culture to looking at Pilates on the basis of a dictionary. And that if a dictionary are words. And the question then is, if I make a word up, how do I know if the word is this name? See where I'm going with this? It can go from hieroglyphics that were considered to be only pictures to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and the revelation through that the pictures were letters in an alphabet and therefore the basis of a language. And so within the view of MMP, right, understanding the ideal and what the ideal is made of in terms of this choreography, when you know why it's in the order that it's in and the character of what's happening as you progress through the exercises, that gives you an understanding of the grammar, which doesn't have to be really big or thick, but it gives you an understanding of the grammar of the way the exercises are connected. And the more clearly you understand that, the easier it is to take your understanding of that into whatever you do and be consistent with what's already there. In Joe's book is all you need to go. There's a lot of other stuff I know in a world of experience and years of training and exploration and listening and personal interpretation. But until you go around and collect all of Joe's books and burn them up, there will always be the basis for somebody's ideal interpretation of what that book says. And my point to you is that when you understand how it's constructed and what's at stake in terms of aiming for an experience, it's a language that you speak. And the better you speak the language, the wider the range of students you can take to depth. Now, those words just came to me. And what I mean by that is you can dive into their ability to find the experience through the performance of the choreography. And as the instructor, the choreography that you do, that's what you're delivering. And see, and that comes back to there is no you in Pilates. The more you understand your role as an instructor of being Yoda pointing into the cave, that's when you have the certainty, in a way. That's when the way you have confidence, really strong confidence, that when you make something up, that it's Pilates. Well, what's the exercise? Does it call for uniform engagement of the musculature? Is it a whole body thing? Does it happen in sequence? I mean, when you made it up, what happens before that and what comes after? Where does it fit in? Because within MMP, there's structure to the sequence that then can be extrapolated into a language. And that's what everybody wants, is the confidence of knowing what they're about. And so there are all these ways of looking at Pilates, and MMP is just one. It's an ideal way, and it has a very real target, meaning an experience, and no matter how much topsoil covers up the tower of rock beneath it, you know, the foundation that it's built on. You want to be able to speak it like a language. And this is one way out of 10,000 views to influence the spontaneity and the creativity about what comes out of your mouth next as an instructor when you're instructing. Life can't live forever. Read between the lines. See behind the curtain. Add two and two. Direct your thinking. Build your confidence. Geist.